Lucas Brayton was a freelance journalist from Chicago, currently experiencing a bout of creative fatigue. After years of writing articles about horrific crimes and unsolved mysteries, he decided to retreat and start working on his first horror novel. A small town named Marrow's Hill, located in the Midwest of America, became his choice, a quiet place so obscure it wasn't even on tourist maps. An old town with a population of less than 800, surrounded by wheat fields and pine forests, and adorned with crumbling 19th-century buildings. It was the perfect place for Lucas to rediscover his inspiration. He rented an old wooden house on the outskirts of town, just 2 blocks from an old cemetery and not far from an abandoned water tower. The house was quiet and dusty but comfortable enough to write in. The first few days went by normally. Lucas began to adjust to the stillness, sipping morning coffee on the porch, jotting down story ideas on his laptop while listening to the wind rustling through the pine trees. But everything changed on the 5th night after he moved in. At exactly 3:17 a.m., Lucas awoke from his sleep. Not because of a nightmare or an alarm, but because of a strange sound, faint, yet loud enough to stir him. Tung, tung, tung. Lucas slowly opened his eyes. The room was dark. The night light hadn't been turned on since he didn't bother to switch it on the night before. The sound came again, clearer this time. Like someone hitting a large can or maybe an old metal drum. 3 knocks, silence, then 3 more. He sat up in bed trying to figure out where the sound was coming from. It seemed to be outside the window. But when he peeked through the curtain he saw nothing. Just the old street lamp flickering gently, and a thin mist hanging in the air. No signs of life. All the neighboring houses were dark, as if the world had stopped. Lucas thought perhaps it was just some mischievous teens banging on trash cans or playing pranks. But who would be out playing at 3 a.m. in a town this small? He tried to go back to sleep, but his mind was restless. The tung, tung sound kept echoing in his head even after everything went silent again. In the end he got up, made some coffee, and began writing in his journal. Strange sound at 3:17. Like a small drum. Maybe some pranksters? But why at that hour? The next night he heard it again. Exactly 3:17 a.m. same pattern. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks. He took note of the rhythm and this time tried recording it on his phone. But the recording only captured silence. Strangely, although his ears could hear the sound clearly, his phone's microphone couldn't pick up a thing. He tried 2 more nights in a row and the results were the same. The sound existed only for him, not for the recorder. He began to wonder, could it be a hallucination brought on by stress? Or was there something deeper, older and darker, hidden in Marrow's Hill? On the 4th day Lucas decided to ask around town. But the answers he received only left him more confused. An old coffee shop owner who introduced himself as Harold said something that made Lucas freeze. We haven't had a mosque in this town since the 50s. The Muslim community either moved away or, well, they just disappeared. Since then there's been no more pre-dawn meals, no more calls to prayer. So if you're hearing a drum at 3 in the morning, you might want to be careful. Lucas returned home with a heavy chest and a mind full of questions. What exactly had he been hearing? Why did the sound come at the same time every night? And more importantly, who was making it? But one thing was certain. Lucas was beginning to realize that he was not alone during the quiet nights of Marrow's Hill. 3:17 a.m. Right on time. Every night. Night 5. 3:16 a.m. Lucas sat in a wooden chair near the window, his eyes fixed on the old wall clock he'd bought from the second-hand store just the day before. He couldn't sleep. Not tonight. He was waiting. Every second felt slower than usual and his whole body felt tense, bracing for something unknown. The long hand ticked forward. 3:17. There it was. The same sound. Soft, yet heavy, like it was being struck from afar, but somehow resonating deep inside his bones. Lucas took a deep breath, grabbed his LED flashlight and leather jacket. This time he wouldn't just sit and wonder. He needed to know who, or what, was making that sound every night at the exact same time with the same eerie rhythm. He opened the front door slowly. The night wind carried the scent of damp earth and pine leaves. A thin layer of clouds covered the night sky, making everything feel even more somber. The tung, tung, came again, slightly louder than the night before. Lucas walked down the narrow road in front of the house, passing a rotting fence and the half-fallen street sign that read Oak Street. There was no one in sight. Just him, the crunch of his shoes on gravel, and that strange knocking sound now coming from behind the old hardware store that had been closed for years. He turned on the flashlight and cautiously made his way toward the narrow alley beside the store. The brick walls were covered in moss and peeling paint. At the end of the alley he saw something move just barely. As he approached, the beam of his flashlight caught a large figure. Lucas froze. The figure stood with its back to him, nearly 2 meters tall. Its shoulders were broad, its skin looked like rotting wood, but it moved like something alive. In its hands was a large rounded stick, like a club or a bound wooden mallet. The creature had arms and legs, though its form was not entirely human. Its movements were stiff but deliberate. It was striking a wooden drum tied around its waist. Tung, tung. The sun had just begun to sneak through the pine trees, casting a pale orange hue across the sky above Marrow's hill. Morning dew still clung to the wooden fence of Lucas's house, cold and wet, when he opened the front door, gripping a cup of warm coffee. But his steps came to a sudden stop. The porch wasn't the same. The pale wooden floor was stained, not with mud or fallen leaves, but with something that made his entire body tense. Barefoot prints, black and large, scorched like the remnants of charcoal. The trail began at the edge of the porch stairs and ended just a few steps away from his front door. No prints led up to it, only away. As if something had come but never left. Or never entered. Lucas set his coffee down on the porch chair and knelt to examine the marks. A faint smell of burning rose to meet him. The wood beneath the prints was darkened as if scorched from within, but not fully burned. He touched one of the prints with the tip of his finger. It was still warm. His heartbeat quickened. He followed the trail, 5 or 6 steps in total. The prints were flat but too wide for any ordinary human. At the very end of the trail, Lucas stopped. There was something else. A clump of ash formed in a small circle the size of a palm. And in the center lay a stone. He picked it up slowly. The stone was dark gray, heavy and smooth like obsidian, but it didn't reflect light. On one side was carved a strange symbol, a curved line like an eye with 3 horizontal marks beneath it. He had never seen anything like it before. He tried to remember, had he heard footsteps last night? Had the tall figure from the alley come to his house? Or had the guardian left this mark as a message? Lucas brought the stone inside and placed it on the table. He stared at it, trying to decipher its meaning. He opened his laptop and began searching for ancient symbols, runes, shamanic markings, ancient scripts from Norse, Egyptian, even Native American cultures. Nothing matched. Then something he hadn't expected happened. The desk lamp flickered. The laptop screen went dark, and white text appeared in a font that resembled an old typewriter. "You have been seen." Lucas froze. The screen returned to normal. He looked at the stone again. But now it felt heavier, as if something pressed against it, or lived inside it. He picked up his phone to call the local sheriff. But there was no signal. Even the house's usually reliable internet had gone dead. Lucas took a deep breath. He knew this was no longer just a strange experience. The footprints were real. The ash was real. The stone was real. And whatever entity was behind it, now knew about him. And perhaps was coming closer. It wasn't just the sound of the drum that was the mystery anymore. It was also who, or what, was listening to it. And whether that sound was meant to warn, or summon. After darkness settled in, Lucas went to bed early. His head was still full of questions. The scorched footprints on the porch, the strange symbol on the stone, and the terrifying message on his laptop. He tried to calm his mind, put in his earplugs, turned off the bedroom lights, and pulled the blanket up to his neck. But the peace didn't last long. He began to dream. In his dream, he was standing in the middle of an empty street in downtown Marrow's Hill. But the town wasn't like usual. The street lights were off. The sky was pitch black, starless. Thin smoke drifted through the buildings. There were no car sounds, no wind. Only one sound echoed. Tung, 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 Sahur. Lucas turned his head. The sound came from afar, echoing as if bouncing off countless alleyways. He didn't know why the word Sahur was used, something unfamiliar to him, but every time the sound echoed, his chest grew heavier. Tung, 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 Sahur. The sound came closer. Suddenly, out of the mist emerged a tall, massive figure. Not human. Its body resembled walking wood, brown and textured, yet it had arms and legs with blazing red eyes. In one hand it held a massive wooden clapper, cracked and smoldering. Every time it struck the ground, the air trembled with the echo. Tung, 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 Sahur. Lucas wanted to run, but his legs were frozen. He wanted to scream, but his throat was blocked. The figure now stood just a few steps in front of him. Lucas began to suffocate. His chest felt crushed by something invisible. The air thinned. His vision darkened at the edges. The creature raised its clapper and struck it straight at him. Brack. Lucas woke with a violent jolt. He had bitten the tip of his own tongue. His breathing was ragged. His throat dry as if freshly strangled. He could hear his heartbeat thudding in his ears. But what made him freeze in place was the fact that the sound from his dream was still echoing. From outside his tightly shut bedroom window, the sound returned. Tung. Pause. Tung. Then again, heavier, deeper, like a punch to his gut. Tung, Sahur. Lucas slowly pulled back the curtain. The street in front of his house was empty. The street lights glowed as usual. But at the edge of his vision, just under a flickering lamppost, he saw a figure, standing still. Tall. Brown. Smoke curling slowly from its body. In its right hand, it held the large, smoking clapper. And in that moment, the figure turned to face his window. Glowing red eyes met Lucas's gaze. And the sound of the clapper echoed once more, this time like a whisper spoken directly into his mind. Sahur. Lucas stumbled backward, collapsing to the floor, trembling. He realized this was no longer just a dream. The entity wasn't just haunting his sleep, it had crossed over into the real world. And for some reason, it kept repeating the word Sahur. Even though no one in this town was Muslim. There was no mosque. No one fasting. So, who was that call meant for? And why was it struck precisely at 3:17? Lucas looked at his digital clock. 3:17 a.m. Exactly. Again. And Lucas was still sitting on the floor of his bedroom, his body trembling violently. His breath hadn't fully recovered. It felt like a hammer was pounding from inside his chest. But more than that, his eyes couldn't look away from the window. The figure was still there, standing directly under the flickering street lamp. Its glowing red eyes remained locked on Lucas's window, as if it knew it was being watched. The wooden drum in the creature's hand began to smoke. Slowly, black vapor dripped from it, oozing onto the ground like boiling blood. Lucas yanked the curtain shut in a panic. In his heart, he pleaded, "Please let morning come faster. God, whatever this is, make the sun rise sooner. Make the sound stop. Make it all go away." The clock showed 3:25 a.m. Still far from dawn. He knew he couldn't stay in this room. Not with that thing standing just meters away from his bed. With his heart still racing wildly, Lucas crawled, then stumbled to his feet. He grabbed a flashlight and hurried down the hallway toward the guest room in the back of the house. It used to be a storage room, now cleaned and equipped with a mattress. Far from the front window. Safe, he thought. He entered, closed the door, and held his breath to listen. Silence. No footsteps. No knocking. Even the tung, tung sound had vanished. Lucas stood still for several minutes. Only when he was absolutely sure, he let his body collapse onto the mattress. Slowly, the terror began to dissolve, though its echo still lingered in his chest. The room was cold, dim, and uncomfortable. But it was better than his bedroom, which now felt like a walking nightmare. Here, he could hear the ticking of an old clock outside the room. He knew it was still very early, but his body desperately needed rest. His eyes slowly closed. No dreams came. No figure. No sound of Tung 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 Sahur. Just darkness. Just exhaustion. And finally morning arrived. As sunlight crept through the ventilation slats, Lucas woke with a heavy body and a pounding head. But he was grateful. He was still alive. He hadn't been strangled again. He hadn't been visited. He sat on the edge of the bed, trying to recall the events of the night before. He almost convinced himself it had all been a long nightmare, until he stepped out of the room. The hallway was cold. Silent. But on the floor near the living room window he saw it. A black footprint. Just like the one he had seen on the porch the day before. But this time the print was inside the house. Leading toward his bedroom. And stopping right at the door that now stood closed. Lucas stood frozen, goosebumps rising along his arms. The guest room might have saved him last night. But it was clear now, the creature had already found a way inside. After what happened the night before, Lucas could no longer wait for answers to come on their own. The tung, tung, terror wasn't just a sound. It was a presence. Something real. Something that could enter a house, leave footprints, even nearly take his life. He locked himself in his study from the early morning, laptop glowing, fingers restlessly scouring strange forums, cultural articles, and low-quality videos that never appeared in mainstream searches. He started with keywords like drum sound at dawn, haunting sound before sunrise, then gradually shifted to something more specific. Tung Tung Sahur. That was the phrase he kept hearing. Tung Tung Sahur. An hour passed. Then 2. Then 4. He began diving into forums for Muslim diaspora communities, until he stumbled upon a thread that made him stop cold. Someone in Indonesia had shared a story about a Sahur drum beater in their village who had once been seen walking alone in the dead of night. People called it the Sahur Watcher. It usually appeared during Ramadan. The figure wasn't dangerous, unless it showed up somewhere it didn't belong. Lucas read further. This entity was sometimes seen as a mist or a tall, looming figure, carrying a wooden drum and striking it rhythmically as dawn approached. But what truly sent chills down Lucas's spine was a comment from a Malaysian user beneath the thread. If that sound is heard outside a Muslim region, they say it's a sign. The world is leaking. An anomaly. Dimensions out of balance. Lucas sat frozen. Leaking? Anomaly? What does it mean, the world is leaking? He kept searching, digging into old news archives until he found a brief story on an ancient blog with a broken layout. A backpacker from Indonesia claimed to have heard Sahur sounds while deep in the wilderness of Alaska, exactly at 3 a.m. during Ramadan. He also said he'd seen a tall figure with a drum. But the story ended without any explanation. The author vanished from the internet shortly after posting it. Lucas stared at the screen. There was a pattern here. Somehow, for some reason, this creature, this entity, one that should only appear in Muslim countries like Indonesia or Malaysia, had now surfaced in a remote American town, Marrow's Hill. A place without a mosque. A place with not even a single Muslim resident. What brought it here? What was it looking for? Lucas felt he was getting closer to the heart of the mystery. But one thing still hung heavy in the air. Why? The sound of the drum began to echo again in his head. Rhythmic, steady. Tung, tung, tung. He looked at the clock. 2:57 a.m. Not yet 3:17. But the sound had come earlier tonight. As if it knew Lucas was beginning to understand something. As if it didn't want its secret to be revealed. That night, cold wind slipped through the cracks of Lucas's windows. He sat at his desk, trying to calm his restless mind. The investigation into the strange entity had drained him, but fear constantly lurked, haunting every second of the night. Suddenly the sound, tung, 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 echoed again, this time louder and quickly approaching. Lucas froze, his blood turning to ice. He tried to ignore it, hoping it was just a figment of his tense imagination. But the sound came closer and closer, until a large black shadow crept through the slightly ajar front door. The creature, an anomalous figure with a smoky drum in its hand, stared at Lucas with glowing red eyes. Its drumbeat grew faster, sending vibrations through the entire house. Panic surged through Lucas. He ran toward his bedroom, trying to lock the door. But suddenly he felt his body lift from the ground, as if invisible hands were carrying him. In the blink of an eye, he found himself standing at the edge of an old well behind his house, a place long abandoned, shrouded in eerie folklore. The night wind howled. The well looked bottomless, swallowed in darkness. Lucas stared into it, breath held tight, a deep, bone-chilling terror stabbing through him. The anomalous figure stood near the well, tapping its drum with increasing intensity, as if summoning something unseen from the depths below. The tung, tung sounds echoed, filling the void of the night. Lucas felt his body trembling, cold sweat streaming down his temples. He knew this was not a place of safety. With every ounce of courage left in him, he leapt backward and sprinted away from the well. His breath came in gasps, his heart pounded as if it would burst, but he didn't stop running. He made his way to a neighbor's house just a few doors down. Lucas pounded on the door, his voice trembling, his eyes wide with fear. "Please, I need a place to stay tonight," he whispered desperately. The door slowly opened and his neighbor appeared, confused but visibly concerned. Lucas stepped inside and closed the door behind him, feeling a brief wave of relief in the warm, well-lit room. But the sound of the drum still echoed in his head as if it had never truly left. The next morning, Lucas woke with swollen eyes and an exhausted body, still in the home of his neighbor, Mrs. Hargrove, a kind, elderly widow who knew nothing about the strange occurrences in Lucas's house. After thanking her and assuring her that he was fine, Lucas returned to his home, still shrouded in a heavy, unsettling atmosphere. The back door was slightly ajar, and from his bedroom the sound of the closet door could still be heard creaking back and forth. But Lucas was no longer paralyzed by fear. Now he was driven by determination. Determination to understand. He sat once more at his laptop, searching with deeper, more extreme keywords. Millennial anomaly, Sahur drum ghost, Sahur drum 1000 years, Kentangan anomaly prediction. He began uncovering fragments of ancient texts buried in spiritual forums, rare journals, even digitized museum manuscripts from Southeast Asia. One particular document in Indonesian, which he managed to translate, sent a chill down his spine. The sound of Sahur drums where they do not belong is a sign that the sky has opened its seams, and the human world has been touched by imbalance. This anomaly appears only once every 1000 years, heralding a great event that will shake the earth where it manifests. Lucas fell silent. A note beneath the text detailed an event in the year 1024. In a remote Javanese village, the sound of Sahur drums was heard coming from deep within the forest. 2 days later, a massive earthquake destroyed the village completely. No one survived. Then in 2024, in a mountainous region of Thailand, hikers who were not Muslim reported hearing what resembled Sahur drums. 3 days later, a violent storm swept through the area, cutting off communication for weeks. And now, the year 3024 is still far away. But this is the year 2025. Lucas scrolled down with trembling hands. In another document, it was mentioned that the sound of Sahur drums outside of religious or cultural context was a sign that a world point had lost its guardian. Its spiritual dimension had leaked. And as a result, the drum bearer would appear, to warn, or to destroy. Lucas glanced at the calendar. Tonight would be the 7th night since the first sound appeared. In many cultures, the number 7 holds sacred significance. A point of transition. He recalled the location of his house, Marrow's Hill, a small town built directly above an ancient fault line known by locals as the Dead Vein. Long believed to be inactive. But in recent days he had felt subtle tremors beneath his wooden floors. Was it all just coincidence? Had the creature come as a warning? Or was this merely the beginning of something far greater? Lucas turned on the local news. A breaking headline flashed across the screen. National Meteorological Center warns of unusual tectonic activity in Midwest region. Citizens urged to stay alert. Lucas swallowed hard. The sound began again. In broad daylight. For the first time, in the daytime. The anomaly had crossed the boundary. And Lucas's time might be running out. The air felt heavy as though it carried something invisible yet threatening. No birds sang. The wind had stopped. The sky was overcast, but not an ordinary overcast. It was a dark gray, like the sky before a supercell storm, yet with no thunder and no lightning. Silence. Too much silence. Lucas stood in his yard, his face pale, eyes scanning for the source of that sound. Tung, tung, tung. The sound of the Sahur drum no longer confined itself to the night. The rhythm repeated, but it didn't come from one direction. It echoed from every corner of town. From alleys, from the attics of abandoned houses, from underground. People were starting to grow uneasy. Lucas's neighbors, usually indifferent, came out of their homes and stared at the sky. Some of them began asking each other, "Do you hear it too?" Lucas knew his time was running out. He went back inside and shut all the windows and doors. He knew he couldn't fight the being physically. He needed to know how to communicate. One of the ancient texts he had read that morning mentioned that the Sahur drum sound, when not made by human hands, could be tamed, not through prayer, but by understanding why it had come, because of imbalance. Lucas retrieved an old wooden board he had found in the house's storage room and tapped it gently with an iron rod. He tried to mimic the rhythm, tung, 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 then added a fourth beat, tung, pause, tung, tung, tung. Immediately the sounds outside stopped. Everything went quiet. Then, from the ceiling above, the entity began to descend. Slowly, it emerged like a cloud turning solid, tall, cloaked in black, its face unseen, only two glowing red eye sockets visible. In its hand, it held a black wooden drumstick, emitting a faint smoke that smelled of burnt wood and old blood. Lucas took a step back, but didn't run. "I know what you are," he said, voice trembling. "You're not a ghost. You're not a demon. You're a warning." The entity said nothing, but its body drifted closer. It lowered its head, raised the drumstick, and struck the wooden floor once. Thump. The sound echoed like a doomsday bell. The ground shook. Cracks began to spread from beneath Lucas's feet across the house. The walls creaked. Windows shattered. In the distance, city alarms began to wail. Lucas ran outside, seeing his neighbors panic and scatter. A small child fell and Lucas rushed to help him. Just then, from the western edge of town, a massive funnel cloud began to form. A tornado. But this was no ordinary tornado. Its core was pitch black, and at the center of the swirling wind was the silhouette of a colossal Sahur drum, as if the phenomenon was not purely natural, but supernatural. Lucas looked up at the sky and shouted, "You gave the warning. Now stop it." But the creature's voice, deep, heavy, and not spoken from its mouth but directly inside Lucas's mind, whispered, "What is unbalanced must be returned." And the tornado began to move toward the center of Marrow's hill. Lucas knew this was only the beginning. Unless he found a way to seal the spiritual rupture that had opened, this town, and perhaps the world, would lose the barrier between the human realm and the unseen. And the seventh night wasn't over yet.